This episode of the podcast was recorded on the 1st of August 2023 at home in Wicklow, and in it I offer my thoughts and reflections on the passing of Sinead O'Connor, the great Irish singer, songwriter, and voice of truth. So I talk about her and share my own sort of response, my own feelings about what she represented to me. I include at the end of the episode a clip from an episode of the podcast I recorded over 18 months ago when I spoke about the passing of her son. And I just included that again in this episode because it still felt very relevant, what I said then. And there's crossover into areas of mental health and wellness and self-care and attitudes to mental unwellness that I addressed in that. The rest of the episode moves away from that and focuses on two really great films that I watched. One is Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. The other is not Greta Gerwig's Barbie. I'm not sure if I want to see that. But the other is actually Todd Field's Tar, which was out towards the end of last year with Cate Blanchett. And I just found those two movies, I think they're good companion pieces, focusing as they do on singular individuals who are brilliant but flawed, and whose stories hold our attention in brilliant ways because they're told by brilliant filmmakers and performed by two very good actors. And a point I didn't make but wanted to was that they are a great antidote to the superhero movie fatigue syndrome, which I think has affected a lot of people. So one great thing about both movies that there's not a bit of spandex in sight, no capes, no masks, no superpowers. Different kinds of superpowers, if you like, but it's a different kind of stimulation. It's a different kind of provocation for the mind, for the soul, and I found it very, very, very welcome. So that's what's coming up. That's what I'm talking about. So you've got Sinead, you've got Oppenheimer, and you've got Tar, and on the back of each movie, I draw a couple of mental health connections. I try and tether some thoughts that I believe each movie helps to raise. So, see what you make of that. I hope you enjoy it. And the episode concludes today with a Sinead song that I take the liberty to sing myself. So listen to that if you dare. Okay, I'll see you around the corner. Cheers.
Ooh, not gonna change my mind, leaving the dream behind, keep my moji inside.
Hi, my name is Dara Clear and you're listening to The Clear Out. You're very welcome. I hope this finds you in a good moment in time. Do you want to take a beat and check in with yourself? You might think, no, I don't need to do that. Well, maybe you do. Don't dismiss yourself so lightly. How often do you get that moment? How often do you give yourself time to hold yourself and check in with yourself and listen to yourself? And maybe you don't want to, because maybe that's just a bit too much. Maybe there are things you simply do not want to deal with. And that's okay. It probably won't help you in the long run. Avoidance generally doesn't. But if you have the head on, if you have the headspace, if you have the fortitude, the resources to check in with yourself in a meaningful way, in an intentional way, I'm giving you permission right now. Isn't that nice of me? How grand. But I'm giving you permission. I want you to give yourself permission to take a beat and go, I will just check in with myself. I will see if I can pull myself into some semblance of alignment, or I may fully embrace my disarray. I may fully embrace my disjointedness, my disconnection, this broken moment of myself. And that's okay. I might just sit beside myself and put an arm around this iteration of me and go, it's all right. This moment will pass. Another moment is coming. Whoop, there it is. Feel any different? No, exactly the same. Okay, you might have to sit here for a while, but it will eventually pass, and you will eventually find yourself in a different moment, in a different space. And that space may give you a greater sense of possibility. It may give you a greater sense of forward momentum. There, that was a deliberate pause. I didn't rush in to fill the space, to fill the void. I think there's a lot of that. There's a lot of frantic reactivity, a lot of rushing to fill the void, to fill that quiet moment with something, anything other than stillness, anything other than silence, anything other than running the risk of having to face oneself. Anything but running the risk of having to listen to one's what? Pain? Grief? Sadness? One's howl from deep inside. It's okay. It's part of being who we are. Humans, we're pretty messy. We're pretty complex. We're pretty all over the shop. We're contradictory. We're a nightmare on so many levels. Self-tormentors and tormentors of others. And yet, so much better expressed by Shakespeare than me. Capable of so many lovely things. So many lovely, lovely things. Okay, so this isn't coming from nowhere. It's not coming from nowhere. I'm feeling very reflective. I'm feeling quite still in myself, which is a nice feeling. And I am wondering where I should begin. I suppose I want to begin with just an acknowledgement of last week's episode. If you listened to last week's episode, you may or may not have detected anything. I spoke, maybe not at length, but I spoke about having had a difficult day. And as usual, I'd left myself a tiny window in which to record the podcast. And I simply was not in very good form at all. In fact, I was in really bad form when I recorded the episode, and I could barely access a clear thought or a clear connective dynamic that I usually depend on to put out an episode, to record what I do record once a week. And it wasn't until the next day that I realised how fully discombobulated I was, how fully sort of in a state of distress I was. Now, I think I addressed it very directly last week. It wasn't on any level, and this isn't either a cry for, it wasn't a cry for help. God, I wasn't playing that tiny violin. It wasn't a pity party. I was just getting on with it, and I was trying to acknowledge that. And I know, without having listened back to the episode, that it probably didn't have much of a sense of direction or focus or lucidity particularly. And I feel I want to apologise for that. But at the same time, I want to fully acknowledge that my mental health was really poor that day, and I managed to have quite a fairly functional day in spite of that. And you see, I can measure that, I can mark that, and go, that's progress. That's progress to where I was, or how I would have reacted 25, 26, 27 years ago. That's huge progress, that I didn't compound my my day of personal internal crisis. I didn't compound it with bad behaviour. I didn't compound it with bad patterns, with extra helpings of self-recrimination and self-judgment. And so to get to the end of that day and to sit down and record the podcast as I normally do, on my seat, thinking in my seat and just letting it flow, I go to myself, well done. Well done, me. But I do apologise if you listened and were like, that really wasn't that good, was it? That wasn't that interesting or enjoyable, and lacked a bit of energy and dynamism. But I think I'm viewing it as an artifact of one person's true moment, and that was me. And I was in a moment that I wasn't enjoying at all on any level, and I've had a few days like that of late. They're just kind of cropping up, and I did say last week I was going to try and get to the bottom of it, and I haven't yet. Broadly speaking, I'm not enduring a spell of anxiety. I'm not going to try. I'm not going to sit here and try and work it out as I record. That doesn't feel quite appropriate. It feels self-indulgent and a bit narcissistic. So I'm going to let it go for now. But it is... I'm not doing this by accident. I want to speak about mental health. I want to speak about self-care. I want to speak about moments of vulnerability, moments of brokenness, moments of, as I referred to it earlier, internal crisis. And I want to speak about it because it feels timely, because we've just lost a very significant, consistently authentic, consistently vulnerable, consistently true voice in the person of Sinead O'Connor, who died last week in circumstances that are not being treated as suspicious by the police in London, where she was found in her apartment, having recently moved over to London. My sense is the widespread speculation is that it may have been suicide, and I'm not saying that lightly. I'm not saying that salaciously, and I'm not even speculating that strongly that was the case. I'm just saying that's what I've heard other people speculate, infer from the circumstances of Sinead O'Connor's life in the last couple of years. It may have been a pharmacological accident or mishap, akin to the way some other high-profile people have passed away. Again, I'm not suggesting like a drug overdose as such, but maybe something that was taken to dull the pain, to quiet the voices. Yeah, I think my assumption is that Sinead O'Connor wasn't in a very good place and hadn't been, particularly since the death of her son by suicide in January of last year. And I spoke about that then, and I'll decide by the end of this recording whether I'll include that clip at the end of today's episode, because it feels just as relevant now in the context of Sinead O'Connor's death as it did then in the context of her son's death. And it's just another moment of great sadness and a moment of acute loss, nationally, internationally. She was kind of a beloved and inspirational figure, and lived out her life in a very sort of naked way. No matter what she did, she was ineffably herself, and it was clear at different stages in her life that she was desperately searching for something, some sort of meaning or some sort of shape that would help her hold herself together and help her channel her spirit in a way that was functional and meaningful. And I mean, I referred to that in that episode when I spoke about her son's death, that how, she tried on many different hats over the years. But regardless of that, the through line was her authenticity, her outspokenness, her rawness, her ability to probably to make people uncomfortable with how frank and candid she was about the things she cared about. Often ferociously attacking institutions that she felt had failed vulnerable people in this country particularly. Obviously, famously, she was on that corner from a very young age, when she appeared on Saturday Night Live, and at the end of her song held up a photograph of the Pope and ripped it up into several pieces as a statement of protest against the Catholic Church and the abuses it had perpetrated against so many innocent children, particularly, I think, and so many young mothers so many people in this country and elsewhere, and the kind of the cover up that went on there, the hiding of those crimes, the moving of abusive priests around different orders and parishes, shameless cover-ups and shameless behaviour, and disgusting. And I've spoken about that before on different episodes, unconnected to Sinead O'Connor and her own crusades. But yeah, I've been a fan of Sinead from as soon as she appeared. I found her sort of amazing and beautiful and inspirational. And I haven't followed her music through the years, but it was always her. I just thought she was interesting and cool, and I really respected her and kind of loved her, and was so proud of her as an Irish person, sticking it to the man, as an Irish woman walking her own path, and not playing the game, not allowing herself be pushed into any particular shape to suit expectations of others, and to suit the expectations probably of a music industry, of a media that would go, no, you're a young beautiful woman, you're a rock star, pop star, whatever, singer songwriter, you should behave like this, you should look like this. And she, right from the off, she's like, no way, Jose, I'm playing this my way, you're going to meet me on my terms, or to hell with you, basically. And I think it came at great, I don't know, like I was going to say it came at great cost to her, but I don't think she would have had it any other way. And I don't think there's any question that she had some profound mental health troubles of her own over the years, and they've been very public at times and very messy. And her sort of unravelling in the fullness of her grief in the immediate aftermath of her son's death was particularly harrowing and confronting and awful and pitiful. And yeah, it's just so sad. It's just so sad. I can't separate that event and that time with her own passing last week. And my heart is just a bit broken, for her, and selfishly for myself and for anyone who continued to sort of hold her in a special place. So she just belongs to a very particular group of people who just kept that torch aloft, alight and aloft, and did so consistently. In a way, maybe I should have spoken about her. Last November I did an episode on outspoken idealistic figures, and I focused on Bono from U2, I focused on Bruce Springsteen, and I focused on Spike Lee, and I referred to them as preacher men who, in their earnestness and in their sincerity, were often very self-indulgent and very uncool, almost out of control with their passion and their convictions and their righteousness. But I kind of love it. And it can be hit and miss in terms of the art, but I really respect that what they represent. And it's funny, a friend of mine, how are you, Ian, if you're listening, a friend of mine sent me a little quote. I don't have it here because I just didn't keep it to hand, but essentially it was something Sinead O'Connor said, at some point in the past, about just hoping that Bono wouldn't be let speak at her funeral because he just shite on too much. Which, again, just that great, just her way of kind of undercutting the pomposity and her own kind of self-deprecation. My friend also pointed out to me that he had a memory of me back in the mid-90s saying that there should be a special space carved out for Sinead O'Connor as a national treasure, in the way that the English are so good at bestowing that status on certain beloved figures in popular culture in England. Somebody like Stephen Fry comes to mind, a national treasure. Judi Dench surely is a national treasure. I've no problem endorsing her. Probably not much of a problem endorsing Stephen Fry either. He's had his own messy spells, God love him. But I had these poor, massively successful people. But yes, I was sort of, I don't know, I was quite heartened that I was on the Sinead O'Connor thing way back when. Sometimes I forget I wasn't a complete idiot, when I was younger. But anyway, so all of that is simply just my way of saying, goodbye, Sinead. I always loved you. I thought you were fantastic, and you will be missed by me and many, many, many others. And yeah, I think I will put that clip on at the end of today's episode from January of last year, because it's specifically about Sinead and her loss then. But I also speak just about the broader need for how we regard mental health and how we regard people in crisis. And I think, and just a final word there on Sinead O'Connor and part of that journey for her, I think I certainly would have come across people who would have sort of ridiculed her and ridiculed that messiness and ridiculed that vulnerability, and we're all too happy maybe to take cheap shots at her, and that's part of the problem. Obviously, it's part of the problem when that's the response, and that's a response that's born of cynicism. It's a response that's born of being afraid to look at or be with emotional and psychological distress and emotional and psychological unraveling. And I think the more we can just accept that that's not the defining thing about a person. I think that's probably a good way to think about it. That maybe people just go, oh, here we go. Here's this one again. Oh, here's this fella again. Oh, Jesus, she's not crapping on about that. Oh, feck. There he is, wanging on again about depression. And we've got to get comfortable with it. We've got to get comfortable with it. So across society, we can just accommodate it better, because that would help. And it's also more bloody mature, and it's also more caring. It's also more decent. And there's a certain selflessness, a certain altruism to go, I'll sacrifice my desire for comfort so I can help somebody else. I'll sacrifice my desire for comfort and the cleanness of my safe space just so I can lend somebody an ear, just so I can let them be heard or let them be seen, because that's a big part of helping, and that doesn't cost that much. Okay, so I'm going to move on. I spoke not very well last week, I feel, about a couple of movies. Sidney Lumet's Prince of the City and William Friedkin's To Live and Die in LA. So I'm going to try and atone for my sins this week, and I'm going to talk about a couple of other movies, and see see in what way I can tether them to a broader mental health or a broader wellness context. I may not do that, because the films in their own right stand up so well. I mentioned last week I was going to go and see Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer, and I did. I went with my brother Danny last week, and we attended a packed cinema down in Arklow, and that was a bit of an event all of its own, just to be in a busy cinema again. I think the last time I was in a packed cinema, I was still living in Melbourne, and it would have been 1 or 2 years before we came back, so it would have been 2018 or 2019, and I went to see Martin Scorsese's The Irishman, and it was a packed and very hot cinema in Elsternwick in Melbourne, in the classic cinema there, which that was my kind of go-to cinema for the 10 years I was in Melbourne. Great little cinema, really nice, great scheduling of a lot of good, interesting movies, and that was an event. The Irishman was an event, and once again, here we are, Oppenheimer and Greta Gerwig's Barbie combined. They were released together last weekend or the weekend before last, and have absolutely exploded across the world and drawn huge crowds. There's just been this huge shot in the arm for cinema numbers, for cinema attendances. And I was told by a guy working at the cinema last week that the previous night they'd had 2,000 people in, and he said mostly it's been Barbie driving it. But I went to see, when Danny and I went to see Oppenheimer in the IMAX screen there, and that was packed. And right from the off, then you had this sense of occasion, and it was it was roasting, and you could see people getting up, men, I think more so than the women that I noticed, but men standing up, just soaked through the backs of their shirts or t-shirts. I was somewhere in between, but Danny was like glued to his seat. But yeah, the movie was great. It was great. It was powerful and haunting and brilliant. And I suppose my first thoughts were that was an adult film made for adults, and full of boffiny, sciencey, quantum physics-y dialogue, and exposition at times, but full of great performances, no matter how small, and great actors, both male and female, with a terrific central performance by Cillian Murphy. It was really, really good. I really enjoyed it, and I suppose I don't want to do any spoilers because it's still very early in its release, and if you're listening, you may be considering going to see it. So I do not want to ruin anything for you. Of course, it's all of historical record, so yeah, you probably have a strong sense of the story anyway, and fundamentally it is driven by the work of Robert J. Oppenheimer, who is attributed with basically coming up with the smarts, the ideas, the formula, whichever, to create the atom bomb. And that is one of the two bombs that were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima at the end of the Second World War. And the movie, and this is a hallmark of Christopher Nolan's, it plays with time, so it's sort of a three-part timeline which jumps around and intercuts and intersects, and you're sometimes in the present, sometimes in the past, sometimes further in the past. And on one level, it's a kind of character study and biopic of Oppenheimer. On another level, it's a study of great men, or a great man, and the enemies a great man might attract over a lifetime. It's also a look at the emergence of the early days of the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union, and it is maybe most excitingly about the specific work and tests that led to the first big test detonation of the prototype atom bomb, and it's all kind of pinned on Cillian Murphy's very slim shoulders, and he's really good. He's really good, and plays Oppenheimer with a lot of nuance and subtlety, and Christopher Nolan gives us a lot of different perspectives on him, even though we spent a huge amount of time with him. There's no shying away from the complexity of the person, and the sort of maybe pathological or perhaps neurodiverse or whatever, or however you might like to describe the personality. An interesting combination of things, and some of the other major characters in the movie, two women, two very significant women in Oppenheimer's life, a wife played by Emily Blunt, a lover played by Florence Pugh, a sort of comrade and a comrade, a guide, a benefactor, a protector, played with a lot of humour and great sort of charisma by Matt Damon, an antagonistic fellow scientist played by Benny Safdie of the Safdie brothers, and then maybe most sort of potently the small man offended, the small man insulted, rubbed the wrong way, and then determined to extract his pound of flesh is Robert Downey Jr. And these are all based on historical figures, and really, really good. Really, really good. Robert Downey Jr., quite a slippery performance, and he just kind of holds back which is not really Robert Downey Jr.'s natural impulse generally. And he's an actor I struggle with sometimes, with his kind of busyness and his shtickiness and his little tics and his little tricks and his cuteness. And he stays away from most of that, thankfully, in this. It's one of his better performances, in my opinion. But he reminded me, particularly later in the film, he reminded me of Salieri, to F. Murray Abraham's Salieri to Tom Hulce's Amadeus in Milos Forman's Amadeus, which was, what year was that? Was that 83? Was that 83 or 84? Didn't F. Murray Abraham win the Best Supporting Actor? That's a great performance. That is a great performance. He is dark. An actor so capable of darkness, F. Murray Abraham. See also Scarface, and the brutal end that he comes to in that movie. I'm talking about Brian De Palma's 1983 Scarface. Downey Jr., he reminded me of Salieri. Just containing his indignation, containing his sense of being offended, the slight. And it's such a throwaway moment when that actually occurs. Oppenheimer, Cillian Murphy just makes a little throwaway comment, which is indicative of his insensitivity, of his sometime poor interpersonal skills, his poor social skills. He wasn't really there to finesse anyone. And indeed, you get to go on that journey with him and see him at his most confident, his most arrogant, maybe even hubristic. But overall, I think an enormously sympathetic and humanizing portrait of a massively significant historical figure. And there's a whole section of the film which is a Senate hearing to ratify Robert Downey Jr.'s character, and that was immediately, to me, evocative of The Godfather 2. And Christopher Nolan makes some interesting choices in terms of the cinematography and the film stock and the film aspect to differentiate these different times and different moments in Oppenheimer's life. And there's also a much less public, much less grand type of trial that plays out behind closed doors when Oppenheimer is truly being the victim of a witch hunt, and he is cross-examined and interrogated with a nice streak of sort of right-wing fanaticism and zeal by the Australian actor Jason Clarke. Really, really good in that role. So lots of good things, and some great visual flourishes. Emily Blunt and Florence Pugh, both really, really good. Two of the probably most compelling actresses working in cinema today. Just very, very strong presences in any movies they appear in. And the companion piece or companion pieces I would recommend to take in if you're considering seeing the movie you should go and listen to the 2 episodes dedicated to Oppenheimer on the Rest is History podcast. And that sort of fills in some of the things that aren't discussed so clearly in the movie. But brilliant work as usual from the 2 presenters of The Rest is History. So that would be a great compliment to watch, to listen to either before or after seeing the movie. I went back and listened again to the first one of those episodes after seeing the movie, just to refresh my memory, and enjoyed it even more, because now I could populate the podcast with the actors and their characterizations as seen in the movie. So yeah, really well worth watching, I think. And as I said, haunting in terms of the significance of that technology, the significance of that science, and what it led to. And yeah, the movie leaves us at a very particular point with a very particular impression of Oppenheimer. If you listen to that second episode on The Rest is History about Oppenheimer, The Rest is History podcast on Oppenheimer, that fills out that picture a bit more and will leave a very different impression. And that complexity is very welcome. So I'd recommend that as well. In terms of mental health, here comes the tether. In terms of mental health, I was trying to think, there's a couple of things to take away from Oppenheimer. Like, one is living with what you've done, living with what you've created, and living with what you've created and lost control of. And also thinking about, who do you trust with what you've created? Who do you trust with something truly precious that's come from you? Who do you trust with something that's very integral to who you are and what you've worked on, that is inextricably linked to you as a person? I think they're very important questions if you're talking about self-care, if you're talking about personal responsibility. Obviously in Oppenheimer, the technology is the bomb, and ultimately Oppenheimer gives that technology to the military, and that is a very key moment in the movie when they take that away physically, and he's like, okay, what happens now? And it's like, your work here is done. Now it's ours, and whatever your intentions were for this technology, we have some rather different ideas and some very different agendas and objectives. So it's, I suppose, in a mental health context, in a wellness context, it's choose your confidants carefully. Choose who you share parts of yourself with that are maybe most precious, or have the most potential to harm you. Choose carefully who you share that stuff with, and I mean, and that's an important part of, being open and being vulnerable. You can't, you might not be able to help yourself, but knowing the right audience, knowing the right people to share that with, that's an important part of navigating that and negotiating that, and being able to grow or draw strength from that. And yeah, it's if you choose the wrong bedfellows, so to speak, that can really go pear-shaped very quickly. And if we stay with the bomb, of course, that metaphor lends itself very well to things that can explode in your face and potentially destroy you. I mean, that would be the worst end of it. But sometimes we can feel like that. And sometimes in moments of personal crisis, things can feel catastrophic. They can feel like they're going to change the world forever. And that can be a very central part of the sense of being overwhelmed. And that's that's something that Christopher Nolan conveys very well in the movie, the overwhelming nature of the bomb and those explosions. So yeah, there you go. Okay, another adult movie for adults is Tar by Todd Field. Not Todd Fields, as I referred to him back in whatever episode I was talking about him. Todd Field brought Tar to the world towards the end of last year with an extraordinary and utterly brilliant and compelling performance by Cate Blanchett, that amazing Australian actor, as the title character, Lydia Tar, a classical music conductor at the very pinnacle of her career, at the very top of her game. And the movie, over quite a long time, it's not quite as long as Oppenheimer, is 3 hours, so wear comfortable trousers. Don't drink too much. Tar, I think, is about 2 3/4 hours, so of similar length, but a very different movie. But I think kind of, in ways, a far more daring movie than Oppenheimer, because it's almost, at times, it is a type of slow cinema, just these long dialogue heavy scenes, and ultimately Tar, and again I'll try to go very light on spoilers in case you haven't seen it yet, and I highly recommend it, but fundamentally it's a study of hubris, a study of ego, a study of greatness and brilliance and a type of genius. It's definitely a study of a very particular corner of the arts in terms of focusing on classical music and that world. And what we're looking at is a very successful person in that world, of a certain generation who believes themselves to be untouchable, and they behave in that way. And yet I found myself drawn to this person, and this is Cate Blanchett as Lydia Tarr, drawn to their convictions, their commitment to their belief in what their role is, what their gift is, what their vision is. And there are a couple of set pieces early in the movie that give us such a strong flavour of how a person in that role is fated and fawned over, and how they walk in that light, and how unashamed they can be in their behaviour. So there are aspects of Me Too in this, except we're dealing with a gay protagonist. Cate Blanchett's character is gay and in a relationship with her partner / wife, and they're raising a daughter. And I found myself thinking, this behaviour and this misbehaviour of this person in power, how would we view this if we were looking at a straight male protagonist? And I understand from listening to Todd Field being interviewed that he was very aware of that let's put a female into this role and see what that looks like. And I don't know what other actress could play that role so well. There's something about Cate Blanchett and how sort of patrician she is, that sort of highbrow vibe she can give off, that I belong at the highest levels of society vibe she can give off. And it is her physicality, it is her face, it is those cheekbones, it is those eyes, it is that confidence and that intelligence, and it is that voice. And she brings it all to bear. And she is just doing this dance in her life throughout the movie. And just slowly, we just begin to see the wheels come off. And it's just done really brilliantly. And there are certain choices that are made. One choice, and I don't know if Todd Field wrote this into the script or if this was Cate Blanchett, but one choice is simply the way she pronounces her daughter's name. And the name is Petra, but that is not how Cate Blanchett or how Lydia Tarr pronounces the name. And that by itself, the second I heard it, my cogs were turning, going, what's that about? What is this sort of deliberate alternative pronunciation? What's that telling us about this character and their striving for exceptionalism, or their insistence on imprinting their mark even on their daughter's name. And there's one great scene later in the movie where Cate Blanchett is talking to another character and refers to herself as her daughter's father, which I just thought was brilliant. It was so unexpected and so confident and confrontational, and yeah, just again, just brilliant. So yeah, I think it's a super movie, and just watch it for Cate Blanchett. Just watch it and be in on the sort of, I feel, I shouldn't say be in on the joke, but I think we're being invited to go, isn't this insane? Isn't this insane how these figures are given so much room and given so much slack and allowed to behave so badly? But she is such a compelling performer. You just enjoy spending time with her no matter what she's doing. And it's a beautiful film to look at as well, and there are great supporting performances and some quite comical performances, maybe none more so than Mark Strong as a sort of a lesser conductor who Cate Blanchett tolerates but barely. So again, just really, really, if you haven't seen it, make it your business to see it, and enjoy the ride, and enjoy the punchline that comes at the very end. And there's something very tragic about that punchline. But again, a film that's not pandering to the audience, that's not trying to make it easy for the audience, that offers a lot of space with which to view the protagonist, and to make up one's own mind what one thinks of her. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, and didn't find Lydia Tarr as beastly or immoral as some others, but maybe I was just enjoying Cate Blanchett's acting. Maybe if I watch it again, I'll come down harder on her character. So what I'm not sure what wellness idea I can attach to Tar. I think it's just you got to keep the reins on, keep your ego in check, and just be very careful in how you deal with others, because it might be so lovely all the way to the top, but when you're coming down, that's when you're going to see the people you've mistreated. I can't, in all seriousness, I'm not sure I can tie anything to that. It's you're in rarefied company when you're with Lydia Tarr, but it is a fascinating character study of someone who perhaps created their own myth, and there are very overt and clear indications of that, particularly to the latter part of the movie, and it's, I don't know, I find myself, as I say that, thinking about maybe the wellness idea is be careful of how far you travel away from yourself. it's going to be much harder to sustain the further away you are from who you are. That is not a version of yourself that will last. It won't hold up. It won't be able to protect you. I find myself thinking straight away of karate, self-defense. The further away from your body, from your torso, from your core, your block is, the less effective it is. And the closer to your core, the stronger it is. And so if you take that idea and go, am I living authentically? Or is this persona I've built really, really far away from who I am? Because I think that brings the self into crisis. And I think of Will Smith and the Oscars last year, and him slapping Chris Rock, slapping Chris Rock. And my argument then and now is Will Smith's persona got the better of him and ran away with him, and led him to that sort of crazy act. And that maybe is analogous to what plays out for Lydia Tarr. But yeah, again, I've tried to give you very few actual details of things that play out in the story, but in the movie. But it really is well worth checking out. And woke politics and identity politics play out in the movie, and the sort of the arrogance of youth plays out in the movie as well, and that's a very key part of how Lydia Tarr gets outmaneuvered at one point, because her vanity and ego blind her to the threat of who she perceives to be a potential protege / lover. So yeah, it's a thorny, spiky movie, but really, really brilliant and well worth checking out. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to leave you with I'm going to leave you with two things. I'm going to put in that clip from episode 34 of the podcast, which was a podcast in which I spoke about. The episode was called "Liminality Isn't Criminality," and I think it was called "Living in the Human Zone." And I was talking about zones of behaviour and where we transgress and what can happen between zones. And it was at the end of that episode that I spoke about Sinead O'Connor's son and his death, because I make reference to a liminal zone in what I say. So I'm going to play you that clip next, and then I'm going to finish up with one of my favourite Sinead O'Connor songs, which to me feels particularly poignant at the moment, and that is how I'm going to end today's episode. So I won't play out with my normal music, so I'll say my farewells now, and yeah, you can throw me some love on social media. The links will be there wherever you're listening to this episode. You can support this podcast using the Patreon link. That's patreon.com/theclearout. If you want to get behind this independent weekly endeavour, you can do that. and I'd be very grateful for whatever you can contribute. And if you can't, don't worry about it. But if you want to support in other ways, yeah, do that. Leave a comment, leave a recommend, rate, review, subscribe, all of those things, and that all helps. And I'm just very grateful, one way or another. Okay, so I will talk to you next week. Stay safe, stay well. Reach out to someone if you feel like talking. If you need a bit of love, if you need a bit of support, if you need a hug. You don't have to carry the whole burden by yourself all the time. People care. I guarantee you there's someone out there who cares. So take a chance and get that help. And of course, if things are really serious, seek professional help, professional counselling, whatever it takes. You'll benefit from that. And on that note, I will tell you to mind yourself. Okay? Mind yourself, mind yourselves. Take care. And I will talk to you next week. All the best. Cheers. I just want to finish today's episode by acknowledging Sinead O'Connor's loss. She lost her son to suicide last week. A young man, he was only 17. I think he was Donald Lunny's son also. I just think it's so sad. He was this kind of beautiful looking kid. I wasn't really aware of any of his backstory. Apparently he'd had some very serious mental health issues, and his mother, Sinead, the singer, she's kind of an icon really. I've always had enormous affection for Sinead O'Connor. She's had a messy life, and she's been very messy at times, but I feel she's always been a voice of truth, even though she's tried on a lot of different hats. She's always kind of been out there and very messily authentic, sometimes misguided, sometimes lost, sometimes clearly a person in a lot of pain and distress. And yet I still see her as someone, I find her quite inspiring in many ways, and I don't know, my heart breaks for her at the moment. What a horrendous loss. She was appealing to her son on social media not to do anything to himself, and it all came to pass quite quickly, it seemed, over a couple of days. And she has been in the media subsequently expressing her anger at institutions, and then she's apologised for that anger, and it's a terrible thing. And I don't know, I just found myself asking, what can we do really? I mean, there must be more we can do to create something culturally, something in our national psyche, in our sort of national sensibility that makes vulnerable people, regardless of their age. I mean, being a teenager, that age is particularly, that's that zone, that liminal zone, leaving adolescence, entering adulthood. Can be a very fraught time, but it's not just young men who kill themselves, and it's not just, it's women, it's everyone, it's whoever, old people, young people, suicide, self-harm, the urge to self-destruction, the sense of having no other choices, the sense of being overwhelmed. I mean, I can relate to it. There are aspects of my own depressive episodes that certainly go to that place even still. I'm lucky that I've developed pretty good strategies to cope with that and not act out. But I think, as I say, it's something I feel I have quite a bit of insight into. And yeah, I just think it's just a terrible tragedy. It's a terrible loss. And I don't know what the answer is to help us talk more about it, to help us feel there are avenues to express our fear, our sadness, our darkness, that we can cultivate cultivate something culturally, socially, across across all sectors, that makes people feel there's a safe space, there's a safe space to express this version of myself. There's a safe space to unload. There's a safe space to be completely broken, and I'll be supported, and I'm not going to be condemned or judged for this. I don't, it's not as simplistic as that. There are other aspects, of course, to anyone's suffering, but yeah, I just my thoughts and my heart is with that family and the people connected to that, that beautiful young man, and how terrible it is that he's gone. And yeah, my sympathies to anyone who's had to come into contact with that experience. Not that specific one, Sinead O'Connor's son, but in a general sense, maybe all of us have been touched in some way by stories like that. So there you go. Let's I don't know, let's do better. Let's contribute to something better if we can. Let's not be afraid to put our hands up and go, this is what I think. I'm going to leave you there, and yeah, sorry to maybe. No, I'm not going to apologise. This is important stuff. It's worth talking about. We shouldn't be afraid of it, and we shouldn't be afraid to allow ourselves to feel things, and we shouldn't be afraid to allow ourselves to dwell on these areas of loss. It's a loss to us all when someone takes that choice. It's a wound. It's a wound in ways we're all responsible for in some way, if we care about our fellow travellers on this earth. In this heart lies for you a lark born only for you, who sings only to you. My love, my love, my love. I am waiting for you, for only to adore you. My heart is for you. My love, my love, my love. This is my grief for you. For only the loss of you, the hurting of you. My love, my love, my love. There are rays on the weather. Soon these tears will have cried, all loneliness have died. My love, my love, my love. I will have you with me. In my arms only, for you are only my love, my love.